looking at a dead man. Yes, a dead man. Most of you, I'm sure, have been to funerals, and maybe even been with somebody when they passed away. But I doubt any of you have seen a walking, talking dead man, let alone one that has been dead for 4 days. Yes, I am Lazarus, the man that Jesus raised from the dead. Many of you know that my family, my sisters Martha and Mary and I, have a very prominent place in the gospel story. You probably remember the time Jesus was at our house with the disciples, and Mary was at Jesus' feet, listening to him talk about the scripture. Martha was so upset by this that she came out and asked Jesus to ask Mary for her to return to the kitchen so that she could help keep the guests comfortable and content. You can imagine all of our surprise when Jesus said, "No, Mary is where she should be," since it was usually just the men at that time who learned the scripture. But we shouldn't have been surprised in hindsight, because Jesus did more than anybody who had come before to elevate the role of women in our society. Now, our family had grown up with Joseph and Mary and Jesus, so I guess it was only natural that as time progressed, our friendships just grew closer and closer. As Jesus left his home in Nazareth and began his public preaching and teaching, he often stopped at our home as a resting place. I remember one time when he was talking to someone who was considering being a disciple, he pointed out to the man that foxes had dens, birds had nests, but the Son of Man had nowhere of his own to lay his head. But Jesus was very comfortable in our home, and I can't tell you the number of times that we hosted he and his disciples, and we were proud to do so. Having Jesus as a friend was really kind of a cool deal. We knew he was the Messiah, but still, we'd grown up with him. He was Jesus, our friend. But anytime he would come through, he never hesitated to just jump in and do what needed to be done, fix what needed to be fixed. Being a carpenter by trade and the Son of God was a pretty helpful combination. But still, there were two things that I remember growing up with him and spending time in the early years. One was his incredible ability to take the most complicated situation and simplify it to the point that we could understand. Whether it was an elaborate section of the scripture or just a piece of broken furniture, he had a way of breaking it down into parts that anybody could understand. He also had an incredible sense of calm and peace that traveled with him wherever he was. As soon as he was with you, you just had an instant sense of peace. Well, I suppose you're curious about my story, and I'm happy to tell it to you. But I need to disclose that parts of what I'm going to tell you, actually I got secondhand from my sisters, Mary and Martha, because I was dead. It started with a bad fever. I had come in and did not feel well at all. I was weak and hot. I laid down and told Martha that I needed help. She came over and put a cool rag on the top of my head. It felt better right away, but the fever just wouldn't break. I laid there for days. I know there were times that I was delirious. I also remember seeing how serious my condition must have been by reading what I could see in my sister's eyes as they cared for me. At one point, I remember hearing them talk about trying to find Jesus, which made sense. We had seen him work countless miracles. We had seen him cure the sick, heal the injured. But that's really where my memories stop, because shortly after that, I died. Funerals over time had undergone a number of changes. It used to be that when somebody died, families would try to outdo one another with extravagance over the services and the preparations. A body would be prepared by rubbing oil all over and expensive spices. They would be buried with their finest possessions and lots of material goods. But then there came a great rabbi, and the rabbi explained that he wanted to be buried in the most simple of ways. And eventually things began to change, little by little. By the time I was buried, it was common to be buried in a simple linen like this, the Hebrew word for which translates to traveling dress, which is pretty appropriate. They also bound your hands and your feet tightly with bandages. Because it was so hot in our climate, people were usually buried on the day they passed away and in a family cave with their other loved ones. As it turns out, I was buried exactly how I described and exactly how I would have expected. But what I could never have expected was what happened next. As it turns out, Martha and Mary had sought out Jesus. They expected him to come running to help me, but he did not. Not only did he not come right away, but I had been dead 4 days before there was any contact with Jesus. Martha had heard that he was coming on the road through town, and she went out to meet him. She regrets her tone now, but at the time she was still distraught. She yelled out, "Lord, if you could have just been here, you would have saved Lazarus." I know that he wept openly in the street, and I know that they spent time mourning. I also know that Martha went back to the house and got Mary, and Mary came out and gave him the same scathing message. But after some time to settle down, Jesus asked if he could go to the tomb. So Jesus and my sisters and the followers all went out to the tomb where I was buried. Jesus asked to have the stone rolled away, but was told that they could not because the stench would be way too strong. At that time, he looked up to his Father and prayed. After the prayer, he shouted out. This is where my memory becomes crystal clear. I heard the shout. It was distant, yet very loud. "Lazarus, come out!" I sat up, but man, was I weak. I was weak, and I had no idea where I was. It was dark. But an instant later, a brilliant light came into what turned out to be a cave. I gathered my strength, adjusted my eyes, looked around. There were skeletons laying on the floor beside me. I realized immediately I was in a burial tomb. But as I looked down and saw them, I saw my own dress. I saw my hands and my feet bandaged. I knew that I had been sick. I figured out that I had died and been buried, but I had no explanation for what was going on at that moment. As the light came in and I readjusted, I walked out and saw the crowd of people watching. There, in the front, was Jesus, with his arms open wide and a huge smile. I was stunned, and apparently some of the others were too. One person fainted. Many were jumping, singing, dancing, and clapping. And there were a few that just kept a cautious distance, not really sure what had just happened. Before too long, we all started working our way back to my house. Everybody that was there wanted to either touch me or tell me their specific account of the miracle that they had just witnessed. I couldn't get enough of the story either. It was amazing. And over the next couple days, I asked Martha and Mary several times to repeat it for me so that I could glean any new detail that was there to be learned. I wish I could tell you that things went well from there and that everything went back to normal, but they did not go well. The religious leaders were extremely upset by what had happened with the miracle and the number of Jews that were leaving the synagogue to follow Jesus. They began to plot immediately to kill Jesus and made no secret of their plans. But if you read deeper in the text of the gospel, you will find that they also plotted to kill me. It seemed that their plan for returning to normalcy and back to their normal structure of power was if they could kill the miracle worker and the evidence of the miracle, that everything would return to normal. But it did not return to normal. It was just days after that they did arrest Jesus and crucified him. I was there at his crucifixion. I was there at the foot of his cross. No threat on my life could have kept me away from one more moment with my master. None of us could understand why he had to die, though. What had he done? Listened? Loved? Healed? Were any of those things punishable by death? No. It was pure fear on the part of the religious leaders. I can't tell you how many times I have reflected on that time and wished that I had been left to rot in that cave rather than have to watch Jesus die. It was only a couple days after that we began to hear stories of Jesus being seen. Most people found this utterly unbelievable. But they were not the people that had witnessed Jesus bringing me, a man who had been dead for 4 days, back to life. For if Jesus could bring a man back to life after that, surely God could bring his own son back to life. We did get to see Jesus one more time before he ascended, and that was probably the happiest time of my life. But like I said before, nothing returned to normal, and nothing was simple again. There were constant plots to kill me for the rest of my life, as I was the most visible reminder of the man who had power over death. But I was constantly fueled to go on, because I, perhaps more than anybody else, had been touched by the hand of the Master.